Welcome you all to Trek Wars. Alright, so on today's video, I want to take a look at the Klingon Empire, but before I take a look at the Klingon Empire ships, there's two things that happened to the Klingon Empire that is really important that had caused the evolution of the way the ships are in the Star Trek universe. Number one, it is the Klingons' tradition, or you can call it their religious beliefs, I guess, of how their ships are a representation of themselves and how they treat them. Now, what I mean by that is that in Klingon lore, in Klingon doctrine, a ship should die in combat. So if you have an old, obsolete craft, you don't just send it to the junkyard and let it sit there and build a new ship. You upgrade that ship and you give it the honor it deserves to have a death by combat. So you'll have old ships with modern technology or old ships still operating in combat situations that are honestly too old and should not be operating. Now, the second thing and most important thing about the Klingon Empire is in 2293, the home world of the Klingon Empire had a moon called Praxis. That moon exploded. And after that moon exploded, what happened to the Klingon Empire is basically the Klingon Empire went into bankruptcy and their economy collapsed. And that's another thing that had a huge impact on the Klingon Empire from that point and on. And so we have to factor those two events into the Klingon Empire's doctrine. And so how I'm going to do this is I have created the stats of all the ships during the Dominion War. And I'm just focusing on the Dominion War, and we'll have all the different variants of ships that are there, and I'll explain why they're there and why they're not. The other thing about the Klingon Empire is they are broken up into houses. So there are great houses, there are minor houses, and so that is also a factor, and they don't always operate together. So with that being said, let's get started. Alright, so the classification is going to go from frigate to destroyer to cruiser to battleship to dreadnought. So those are our categories of our ships. Most of them will fall in that category. We'll go from when the ships were introduced into the Klingon Empire, and then we'll talk about where they're standing during the Dominion War. With that being said, we're going to start off with the D7. D7 was brought to the Klingon Empire in 2260. The D7 has a mass of 660 metric tons. Its length is 228 meters. Its crew is 440. It's capable of only warp 7. The attack value is 167,500. Shields are 260. The hull is 297,000. The defense is 557,000. The weapons would have been 10 phasers that are hitting for 3,750. Value 15, 56,250. These are the same disruptors that are being used, which you can refer to them as a phaser as well. The way they operate is the same. Now, this vessel's primary weapon is its two disruptor cannons, which are located on the wings, which are capable of launching one shot per volley, which would be 65,000 points of damage, which is extremely powerful during that time period. It still has those weapons, and that would give it 130,000 points of damage. Now, this ship is operating as pretty much a combat frigate at this point. The minor houses are using this. The upgrades for this ship only went up to around the Katanga level, and then they stopped due to the destruction of Praxis. So these ships are still being operated by minor houses and are in the Klingon Empire, and they're going to be used for light duty and maybe guarding combat or guarding cargo ships and things of that nature. Alright, so finding out that the D7 was being outclassed by range by Federation starships with obviously torpedoes aboard, they created a new variant which is a cheaper budget variant but had an advanced torpedo launcher to outgun at range Federation starships. Now, its stats are identical. The only difference is its attack value is 267,500 now, and its weapons are going to consist of 2 phasers, which are actually disruptors as well, of 3,750. Same seen aboard the Katanga. It's got those same 2 heavy disruptors, but it's been modified with 1 torpedo launcher, which is capable of launching 3 torpedoes, which is 195,000 points of damage. During its time period, it was a very versatile long-range ship. This ship also had a cloaking device. It's going to be operating as a frigate. It's going to be protecting convoys, just like the previous one, except that this one has more adept at being able to attack ships from range and close range and long range. So next we're going to take a look at the Burrell. So the Burrell is 140 meters, crew 12. It weighs 236 metric tons. Its weapon range is 40,000 kilometers. It was introduced in 2360. It has an attack value of 72,500. Shields are 325,000. Its hull value is 195,000. It carries 2 disruptor cannons, and it has 1 torpedo launcher, which is capable of 1 shot. This ship is used by minor houses still. It's not really capable of combat, really. It's going to be used as a scout ship. It's a light frigate. It might even defend a lightly positioned cargo ship or something of that nature, but for the most part, this ship isn't doing much of anything. It's just a scout ship. All right, so in 2271, the Katanga was brought into service. It has 800 crew. It's a pretty decent sized ship at 349 meters. It's 760 metric tons, has an attack value of 412,500. Shields are 325,000. Its hull value is 530,000. Its defense is 865,000. It carries 6 disruptors that are 3,750. With a volume of 15 for 56,250. It has 2 advanced torpedo launchers, which are launching, old Kirk era torpedoes, which are able to launch 3 forward or backwards at 195,000. So this ship has enough firepower that it's going to be operating as a destroyer in the Klingon Empire at this point. The ships are not very well modified. These would have been Katangas that belonged to older houses that couldn't afford to upgrade them, and they're still operating as basically a destroyer. Now they have cloaking devices, and there's not really a whole lot I think you could do with this ship. I'm not calling it a frigate. I'm calling it a destroyer because it does have enough firepower to do something, but it's not enough that it could be a cruiser at this point. This variant is only operating as a destroyer. It's going to protect cargo and transport lines, but it's not going to be in the front lines. So next on our list is the old frigate, the D5L, which has a mass of 544,000, a crew of 300, a length of 280 meters, has an attack value of 145,000, shields 325,000, a hull value 380,000, a full defense of 700,500, 4 disruptors, and 2 torpedo launchers. The torpedo launchers are single shot. So first off, this ship was created around the same time that the Katanga was. They wanted something that wasn't as expensive as the Katanga and that was doing the role of a frigate and a support vessel. So that's what this ship is. They were built in huge numbers. They're basically kind of like the Miranda of the Klingon Empire. They still exist in the Klingon Empire, especially during the Dominion War. They're really not doing a whole lot as far as combat-oriented things. If they are transporting or being involved in combat, they're bringing troops and supplies. Basically, it's a logistics starship now at this point, kind of like how the Miranda has, goes around and brings supplies and is a medical ship and all these kind of things. That's basically what the D5L is. Now, just to understand, this has nothing to do with the D5 cruiser that you all know from, the Klingon past. This is a complete another variant. It's completely different. So this ship doesn't have really anything going for it. It would never have been upgraded. It's just a support ship, a logistics ship, a transport ship. So just a little bit of lore. This ship is actually coming from one of the Star Trek games, and it was their light frigate. So because it was built during the same time period as around the Klingon stuff, which is right before the destruction of Praxis, this is the reason why this ship was completely forgotten and left behind and had no basically upgrades, whatever. Every ship on this list was upgraded up until the point of Praxis and then stopped. All right, so before the Excelsior came out, there was a ship that was in the category in size and power similar to an Excelsior class in the Klingon military. So the Katanga wasn't the biggest ship. One of the biggest ships was the L-24, and it's referred to as the Always Victorious. Now, how you say it in Klingon, I don't really know. It's Vor'cha-class, which I don't really know if I'm saying it correctly, and I don't care. So that ship is large. It is 324 meters. Its crew is 1,109. It carries 480 troops, has a mass of 2,244,000, an attack value of 665,000. Its shields are 1,700,000. Its hull value is 800. Its defense is 2,500,000. Has 8 disruptors, which are newer generation at 16,250. Has a volley of 15 and is 243,750. It has 4 disruptors, which are original disruptors of its time period, which are 3,750, which are capable of a volley of 56,250 points of damage. It has 8 single-shot torpedo launchers. So this ship was actually developed, obviously, before the Excelsior. It was really powerful during his time period. It's absolutely a battleship when it was during Kirk's era. Now, the ship survived for a long time. There were several variants of this ship. And what we're seeing before us is the final variant when they decided that, well, they modified the engines to be about the same time period as what you were seeing with the Enterprise C was coming about. That's when they upgraded this ship with better engines, and then they gave them newer disruptors. And so those newer disruptors are the 16,250 variants that we see here. And then there were a couple more variants built, like 2 or 3. And then they decided that they were going to go ahead and just upgrade the fleet and give them new shielding. So the new shielding is moderate shielding. The shielding that they got was the shielding that would have eventually led into the Vor'cha-class cruiser. So the Klingons were very needy for a strong cruiser during this time period, and they didn't have the Vor'cha. This thing existed before the Vor'cha. This variant we see here was right before the Vor'cha began to be constructed, so they used some of this newer technology and they upgraded this fleet. Now, these ships are going to operate as a cruiser and / transport ship. So overall, when I look at it, the Klingon forces, it's a light cruiser is basically what the ship is going to be. The reason it gets that title and not a destroyer is because it has really powerful shields. And obviously the shields and the mass of the ship, it is very large. It's not a battleship anymore. It's just a light cruiser. All right, so the L-24 during its time period when it was created was not at the level of an Excelsior class. Its shielding was subpar, and it didn't have the firepower to take on an Excelsior class. It was in the category around the same weight class, but just couldn't exactly make it. So then they created the second variant of the B-10 battleship. So the B-10 battleship's length is 625 meters. Its mass is 2,470,000. Its crew is 2,565. Has an attack value of 725,000. Shields are 663,000. Its hull value is 1,150,000. Gives a full defense of 1,813,000. So it has 20 disruptors from the Kirk era. It has 6 torpedo tubes that are Kirk era single shot, and it has 4 heavy disruptors, which are the same disruptors seen on the D7. So there's 65,000, and they shoot once. So this ship was designed to outclass the Excelsior class. Now, these ships were like the previous ship. They were enormously expensive. They're really large. These ships were being built right before the destruction of Praxis. After the destruction of Praxis took place, the Klingon Empire was destitute. they just stopped production of these ships. The B-10 battleships, there weren't that many of them constructed. There was enough of them, but they weren't very common. They were nowhere near the amount of Excelsiors that the Federation had. But because they couldn't afford these ships and they were too expensive, and they were too expensive to upgrade, they just left them the way they are. They kind of went in storage. They were brought back during the Dominion War as like reserve ships. They were just operating as standard cruisers. So after the destruction of the Praxis moon, they created the D-21, the Kamarok, in 2330. The crew is 1,500,355 meters. Its mass is 1,520,000. Its attack value is 1,286,000. Shields are 585,000. Its hull value is 750,750. Its defense is 1,335,750. It's got 2 torpedo tubes, which are launching for 171,000. Could shoot up to 3. It's 1,266,000 per volley. 8 disruptors that are modern with 16,250, a volley of 15. So it's 243,750. It has 2 heavy disruptors, which are hitting for 65,000 and is equivalent to 130,000. So this ship was created after the destruction of Praxis, when the Klingon Empire was destitute. They had been building ships for a long time. Eventually, the economy started catching up, and the Klingon Empire realized that they were so far behind the other empires, they needed to build something to catch up. And so they couldn't afford something that could be at modern ships like the Ambassador class. They were still trying to catch up to the Excelsior class. And so they wanted something that would be cheap and pretty much mass-produced. And so this is what they came up with. Now, the ship did not live up to the expectations of what the Klingon Empire was expecting. They did not actually build this ship en masse. They were built in a reasonable amount, but not in mass. And so there really wasn't much done to them. It was kind of a forgotten, failed project. What ended up happening is they decided to go with lighter, cheaper ships and cruisers. So this ship is going to be operating as a cruiser, but the only real change the ship got or upgrade before the Dominion is that it was launching modern torpedoes. So beforehand, it had an overly large torpedo hangar, which was launching a larger torpedo than what was the standard at the time. So this variant is capable of launching modern torpedoes, but besides that, the ship's stats were pretty much left alone. It was more of a reserve ship. K-Vort of the 2269, also known as the D-12, is 230 meters, crew 430, mass 760,000, attack 185,000, shield 325,000, hull value is 260,000, defense of 585,000. Ship carries 2 torpedoes, single shot, carries 6 disruptors, Katanga level, and it carries 2 heavy disruptors that are more modern, which are 16,250, a volley 14, which is 227,500. It's also noted there are some heavier variants of this ship which have removed the Katanga level disruptors, all 6 of them, and then replaced them with 2 additional heavy disruptors. So the D-21 did not operate the way that they wanted to. It just did not seem to be able to hold its weight. So they decided to go on adventure and design, because the Burrell had been so successful, they built a larger version of the Burrell, armed it better, and they started creating these D-12s. The D-12s were created en masse. It was a very cheap ship. Obviously, its hull strength is relatively low, so the ship was very easy to mass produce, and they decided that they wanted to use numbers instead of strength, because they couldn't compete with the larger ships of the other empires, and so they needed some way to compete with them. Instead of trying to go toe-to-toe with ships of equal size and strength, they decided to use numbers. And so that is where the K-Vort is born. Now, this K-Vort class was designed as a cruiser, but during the time period of the Dominion War, it's brought down to just a destroyer. So as the Klingon Empire began to recover, they just started making new K-Vorts. So this K-Vort has a mass of 1,890,000. It is 678 meters, has a crew of 1,500. Its armor rating is 0.13. Attack value of 472,000. Shields 1,310,000. Its hull value is 260,000. Its defense is 1,570,000. So its disruptors are 32,000 with a volley of 16, which is hitting for 520,000. Has 2 torpedo tubes, which are modern, which are 171,000. So the K-Vord is a modern cruiser by the Klingon standards. This ship can hunt down cruisers and take them on one-on-one because of its shielding and firepower. It's a versatile ship. It's maneuverable. It's got an advanced cloaking device. It also carries a decent amount of troops. The ship overall is pretty good, minus its low hull value, but that's due to budgetary reasons. It's a formidable ship. Now, these ships cannot take on larger ships like a battleship one-on-one by any means, but they can attack them in groups and overwhelm them, and since they're pretty cheap to produce, they can be built in large numbers. So these ships were built in large numbers, and they existed around the same time period as what we call the Lost Generation. These ships were used during the Klingon Civil War, and they were also used during the Dominion War. They suffered massive casualties. These ships are not good at taking on destroyers. They're not maneuverable enough to defend themselves. They only have forward-facing weaponry. So the Jem'Hadar fighters completely decimated these things. So upgraded K-Vord is a mass of 1,890,000. It's 687 meters. Its crew is 1,500. Armor is 0.75. Has attack value of 472,000. Its shields are 2,300,000, 2,000. Its hull value is 520,000. Its full defense is 2,822,000. Carries 4 disruptors, which are modern, at 32,500, a volley of 6, which gives it a full volley of 520,000. And it has 2 modern torpedo launchers that are capable of launching 1 torpedo per volley. So this ship is pretty much identical to the previous ship, except for it has slightly stronger hull, and it has an incredibly powerful upgraded shield. So the reason for this is as the other major empires were starting to produce really large capital class ships like the Romulan Warbird, the Dietrichs, as well as the Federation was developing things like the Galaxy class and the Nebula class, the Klingon Empire needed something to take on ships of that caliber. And so rather than building ships that are going toe-to-toe, they went for the cheaper mass production route. And so this is where the K-Vord that we see here, which is going to be used by the great houses. This is a very expensive variant of the K-Vord. It's way cheaper than, obviously, the battleships of the Empire, but it's not, I wouldn't say it's exactly cheap, but it's not so expensive that it can't be produced on a large scale. So this is a modern ship. This is probably one of the best ships that the Klingon Empire has during the Dominion War for attacking cruisers. Now, it really, really struggles, just like the previous variant, against destroyers because it's not that maneuverable and it only has forward-facing weaponry. So Jem'Hadar bug ships absolutely decimated the populations of these ships. Not to mention the war between the great houses that took place right before the Dominion War. These ships were then decided that they were no longer to be constructed, and they don't really exist in the Klingon Empire after the Dominion War. So next on our list are the modern Barrels. They're 140 meters, 36 crew members, 236 mass, weapon range 40 kilometers. Has attack value 236,000. Shields are 455,000. Hull value is 195,000. Defense is 650,000. Has 2 modern disruptor cannons, KGDM-3s, 16 volley, 520,000. 1 torpedo, which is a KP-2, can fire 1 torpedo. Standard is 171,000 points of damage. This is a modern destroyer, very efficient, very good, very small, very cheap, very fast, extremely effective. Also a scout ship. This ship did phenomenal during the phenomenal during the Dominion War and was really good at countering the Dominion bug ships. It's just as fast, just as maneuverable, but it has firepower almost equal to a Jem'Hadar fighter. Now, when I talk about this ship is built in mass, I mean they have thousands of these ships. This is the most common ship in the Klingon Empire and is one of the most well-respected ships during the Dominion War. So next we're going to look at the Klingon bird of prey, nicknamed the torpedo bird. It's got the exact same stats all the way around, except for the only difference is that this ship has a KP-5 launcher. Now, this KP-5 launcher is launching old-style torpedoes, but it can launch up to 8 of them. So that means it has a torpedo barrage of 520,000. Now, the reason why this ship was built and the reason why it was brought around the same time period is the Barrels and the K-Vorts, which were the most common ships of the Klingon Empire. They don't have a lot of torpedo support, and then the only other ships that they really have that were in large numbers was the Katanga. So they need something that can bring long-range torpedo support, and so this is where this ship came into play. So the Klingon Empire had a huge stockpile of old generation torpedoes. Instead of just getting rid of them, they built this ship en masse in order to equip them with these torpedoes so they didn't go to waste. And so they gave them a very efficient, very fast, small launcher. So this ship was extremely successful because its disruptors are hitting very, very hard. And then as soon as the shields go down, most ships are going to be launching their single-shot torpedo, which is doing good amount of damage. But this thing is doing an enormous amount of damage with its 8 small torpedoes. So this ship was very effective during the Dominion War. It's not built, there's not thousands of these ships. They were a little more, well, I wouldn't say that they were way more expensive, but they were just more expensive than the previous version, especially with that launcher is pretty expensive. So they were built only by some of the other houses that may not be able to build, let's say, cruisers, but they want to be able to fight at a higher level. So some of the minor houses were building these things. Now, this is the bird of prey. This is the command bird. It's got all the same stats, except for its shield is 585,000, which will give it a full defense of 780,000. It's obviously operating as a destroyer, just like the previous variants. It's really not much of a difference. This is the same ship that General Martok was using. There's not really a whole lot to say about it. It's just a Barrel. It's just like if you're in command of a Barrel group, your commander might have one of these ships. It's just a slight upgrade with the shielding. Not really that much more expensive, but slightly more expensive than the original or commonplace Barrel of the Klingon Empire. Like I said, it's not really doing it. It's operating as a really good destroyer. There's not really much more to say about it. All right, so next on our list is the Katanga upgraded minor house, IKB Bumoth, Klingon Katanga class battle cruiser, 800 crew, 349 meters, 760 metric tons, has an attack value of 1,221,000, shields 1,310,000, hull value 530, defense of 1,840,000, 6 disruptors, 32,500, volley 16, 2 torpedo launchers, 171,000, with a volley of 3 each, which is 513,000 per launcher. So it's got a forward and rear mounted launcher that can launch up to 3 torpedoes. So this is operating as a standard Klingon cruiser. Most of the houses have these ships. They've been around for a long time. Many of the houses that would be, let's say, like a minor house, and even the great houses, have Katangas that have been upgraded. So if you had the money and the ability, and you had Katangas still in your reserves, some of the houses upgraded them. So these ships are usually being used by some of the minor houses. There's not really a whole lot to say about it. It's got modern weapons all the way around. It's a decent cruiser. Its hull value is impressive for a ship of its size. Its shields are real good for a ship of its size. Overall, it's a decent-sized cruiser. Not really much to it. It's not great at anything. It's not bad at anything. Its torpedo launcher gives it decent volleys of torpedo. So if you want to bring this ship to a front line, it can deliver a pretty good torpedo spread. All right, so now we're going to look at the Vor'cha-class. This is part Federation design, was developed in 2360s. This is the flagship of the Klingon Empire. Its size is 481 meters. Its crew is 1,900. It's very maneuverable for a ship of its size. Its mass is 2,238,000. Has an attack value of 5,209,000. Shields are 1,796,000. Its hull value is 1,050,000, giving it a full defense of 2,846,000. Its weapons is one heavy disruptor cannon, which can fire 520,000 bolts, or it can shoot a beam of 342,000, which is a KGDM, and it can fire up to 5 times. Now, at 342,000 in 5 shots, it can hit you for 1,710,000. It's got 18 disruptors, which are 32,500, which are KGDM3s, with a volley of 16, which is 520,000. It also has advanced torpedo launchers. It has 3 of them. They are 171,000, which I put 173,000 by mistake, and they are KP6, and they have a volley of 8, which is 1,368,000. So these ships were built by one of the great houses. They then went into mass production after the Klingon Civil War, and they were mass produced. This ship is a phenomenal ship. It is classified as a cruiser. It is not a cruiser. It is in the category of a battleship. It's got the shields. It's got the firepower. It has good hull strength. It's maneuverable. This, in my opinion, is a battleship. This ship can go toe-to-toe with Galaxy-class starships. This ship can go toe-to-toe with warbirds. May not win the warbird fight, but it's strong enough that the warbird does not want to engage this ship. These ships are phenomenal. They have disruptors all throughout the ship. They are perfectly capable of one-shotting Dominion bug ships. The only weakness that this ship has is it is very expensive. Now, something else to note about this ship is when you look at its size and mass, it's similar in size to an Excelsior-class starship. So it's an Excelsior-class starship with the firepower and defenses of a Galaxy-class. So this ship was probably the most important ship that the Klingon Empire had, and it can carry a lot of troops, it can carry a lot of supplies, it's got the weaponry. This is overall the command ship, this is the lead ship, this is the battleship, this is the best that the Klingon Empire has to offer. Next on our list is the Katanga. The 2171 variant is a heavy disruptor. So it has 800 crew, 349 meters, it's 760 metric tons, has an attack value of 559,500, shields of 325,000, hull value is 530,000, its defense is 865,000. It's got 6 original Katanga level disruptors, which are hitting for 3,750, 15 volley, 56,250. It's got 1 rear torpedo launcher capable of launching 3 at 195,000 points of damage. And then it's got 1 heavy disruptor, which is hitting for 342,000. It can shoot this weapon 3 times for 1,026,000. So this ship is a variant of the Katanga. What they had done is there were a lot of old Katangas that had not been modified and were not upgraded, and they didn't want to spend all the time to just fully upgrade them and modify them. They just wanted to have a destroyer that had good offensive capabilities, and they wanted something quick and now because they wanted to attack the Cardassians now before they lost their opportunity. And so they needed more ships. They didn't have enough ships, and so their choices were build some more modern ships or just add a heavy disruptor to these already ready ships, and that's what they decided to do. Now, a lot of people hate on this ship and think it doesn't really worth crap, but these Katangas, though they're not the best ships, their shielding is not very great, their hull is okay, they do have 2 primary upgrades though. In my opinion, the propulsion systems were upgraded because these do seem to be pretty maneuverable. They're not really super slow and sluggish like the original K-Vorts were. And then they have this heavy disruptor. So that means this ship is going to be able to cloak, uncloak, and if it's close to you and it can hit you with that heavy disruptor, it's going to do heavy damage, heavy damage to capital class ships even. So I think the Klingon Empire's idea to modify the Katanga to do this was a really good way of taking a lot of reserve ships and making them viable again. So this would have been a frigate or maybe a light destroyer, but now at this point it's operating at a destroyer level because of that weaponry. And so I think this was a pretty viable idea for the Klingon Empire. One of the newest ships brought into the Empire is the Bird of Prey Fighter. It has a mass of 80,000 metric tons, a crew of 1, the size is 50 meters, has an attack value of 72,500, shields of 325,000, its hull is 65, it has a defense of 390,000, it has 2 disruptors which are hitting for 32,500, and it has 1 low quality torpedo launcher hitting for 65,000. So this ship is operating as a modern frigate. Now it's a fighter, but it's honestly too big to be a fighter, and I'm going to consider it to be a frigate. These are new generation starships. They're using modern weapons. The shielding's not particularly that great, but for a 50-meter ship, it's really powerful. So this is something that was seen attacking Deep Space Nine. This is something that is pretty new. They're just building these really small ships. Now, these things are probably a little bit on the expensive side, just because you're taking something that's like 140 meters and then shrinking it down to 50 meters. You're going to have to like re-engineer the technology, but it's probably not very expensive because it's so small, but it's got some good offensive ability. So this will be really good at sneaking into enemy territory, flying into the atmosphere like birds of prey do, hit and runs, and then getting in and out. And it's definitely small enough where it's not going to be too expensive. That, I mean, it's obviously way more expensive than average shuttlecraft by a considerable amount, but it's probably the same price range comparable to, let's say, like a runabout. And it's the thing, it's a little bit more operationally friendly than a runabout because this thing does have like standard warp speed. It's not going to be carried by anyone. It's operating on its own. It would also operate as an effective scout, just like the Burrell. That's basically all it is. Next is the Suq'jagh class planetary assault ship. So it carries 40 fighter craft. It has a mass of 2,500,000 metric tons. Has a crew of 2,000. Has a length of 480 meters. Has an attack of 3,273,000. Shields are 1,700,000. Its hull value is 800,000. Has a full defense of 2,500,000. Has 6 standard disruptors. It has 2 multi-shot torpedoes, which are capable of firing 8 per volley, and they're using modern torpedo technology, and it has 1 heavy spiral wave disruptor. Now, some interesting information about this ship is it's based on the technology that the Vor'cha-class is using. Now, I'm going to consider this a battleship. It's a light battleship. Its armament isn't very impressive. Its shielding is good. Its hull strength is not as good as the Vor'cha-class. It's basically a budget battleship. Now, the reason why it's going to get the battleship category and not just be considered a cruiser is because the amount of potential damage carrying 40 additional fighter craft can bring means that this ship is going to be punching way above its expected weight class. Now, another interesting fact about the ship is it was built right before the invasion of Cardassia. So this means that there is a possibility that the Cardassians' invasion was being planned even before the Dominion. Next on our list is the most advanced and newest ship of the Klingon fleet, which is the Negh'var class cruiser. So its mass is 4,310,000. It's 686 meters long. Its crew is 2,500. It was built in 2372. It has an attack of 8,582,000. Shields are 3,445,000. Its hull value is 2,004,651. Its full defense is 5,449,651. It has 20 disruptors. These disruptors are capable of a volley of 28 rather than 16, bringing it to a full barrage of 910,000. It has one heavy disruptor capable of firing 520,000 points of damage. It can fire up to 2 times, which is 1,040,000. It has 4 advanced torpedo tubes that are firing modern weaponry, and it can have a volley of 8, which is 1,368,000. And it has 2 siege guns, which are 975,000. It has a volley of 4, which brings it to a whopping 3,900,000 points of damage. Now, this ship was designed to take on extremely large capital class ship. It is obviously a dreadnought. It is able to take on galaxy classes. It could take on the D'Deridex and Warbirds, anything out there. There's not very many ships that could take this ship on a one-on-one basis. Very few things could. The only things that really come to mind to me would have been around the Dominion time would be the Dominion dreadnought and then the Sovereign class. I don't really think too many other ships would be able to take this ship on a one-on-one. So after the success of Chancellor Galron's ship, they did build these during the Dominion War, but they never saw action. So there were 6 to 12 of these ships which were constructed during that time period. None of them saw combat. They were all in the home systems. Without the siege phasers, that's 6,642,000. All the other stats would have been basically the same, except for it doesn't have the siege phasers. The reason why they didn't send these into combat is they were very strong, very expensive. They didn't want to risk losing them, and they wanted to keep them guarding key installations, like, for example, shipping yards and things of that nature. So they really didn't see combat. After the Dominion War, this ship became the mainstream ship of the Klingon Empire and was built en masse, just like the Vor'cha was. So some things are very clear about studying Klingon technology and Klingon forces and Klingon ships is that the Klingon military is very adaptive to its situation, and they're willing to change in order to adapt what is necessary to survive. So the Klingon forces are very adaptable. Now, one of the things that I've noticed firsthand after doing this research is that the Klingons are seriously lacking good cruisers. They have basically no cruisers that are particularly really that great compared to some of the other empires. On the other hand, they have really good destroyers, and they have a lot of destroyers. So their Klingon doctrine appears to me to be about numbers and speed rather than overwhelming slow power. Another thing that I think was pretty interesting is the collection of old frigates that are still being used. Most empires don't keep their old ships around that much. Very few of them keep them around for long periods of time like the Klingon do, or even refurbish them like the Klingon do. Now, obviously, the reasoning that they did this has a lot to do with their economic situation. But as you can see, as the Klingon Empire became more stable, their ships got bigger and bigger. We know after the Dominion War, all their ships become huge again. So we know that Klingons like large ships, and they like really small ships, but they're not big fans of ships in between. Thank you for watching Trek Wars. If you like this material, please subscribe and make a comment. And with that being said, victory is life.